Welcome everyone to For English Satellite, Bush, Satellite, but hello to a brand new, exciting and thrilling episode of Reptile TV. My intro animal today is an albino, rosy boa, Lichenura triviegata, and the whole thing as T. albino. I have to be honest, I was never really a huge fan of rosy boas, but the albino one with the orange and white colors is truly a beautiful little creature. I don't think it has been around for that long, at least in the field of terraristics, so it has been a few years. As I said, I'm not really an insider when it comes to rosy boas. I have definitely seen that it exists for many years now. But I believe it's the first time I own such an albino rosy boa. So I find it pretty and exciting, and that's why it's my intro pet for you today. We consulted artificial intelligence a second time about what would be a great topic for the Reptile TV episodes. And the AI said, "Yusan, this is how you choose the right terrarium for your reptiles. Buying a terrarium is a common question that probably comes up on Google or wherever on the internet, and it actually makes sense when I think about it. Customers, when they come here or contact us via email, of course, that's a classic question. It's funny that you need AI to figure that out. We want to address that as a topic today. Which terrarium makes sense? What terrarium size makes sense? What guidelines are there for this? That is the topic for today. The first topic is the material of the terrarium. So I would say that the common options are wood, glass or plastic. The classic is glass, which has always been around. Ever since I started with terraristics, there have been glass terrariums. They have many advantages. So a great advantage is that glass never really breaks unless you drop it or something like that. But the humidity, the climate in the terrarium does not affect the glass, no matter how humid it is inside. The terrarium still looks just as good 10-20 years later. Nothing happens at all. I can really use it for decades without it rotting, breaking or anything like that. I believe that is a great advantage of the glass terrarium, and of course I can see in everywhere I want to look. It can also be a disadvantage because having glass all around the terrarium is not ideal for the animal. However, this is why people use various back walls and side walls, both for insulation and also as a privacy screen for the animal. But otherwise, the glass has really proven to be great. The second is wood. In recent years and decades, wooden terrariums have come onto the market that are also quite cheap. For example, these OSB terrariums are sold relatively cheaply. It is certainly the most affordable solution if you are looking for a terrarium, whether you build it yourself or buy a ready-made OSB terrarium. Build it yourself, but be careful and calculate beforehand what it will cost. Wood and the materials, the tracks and everything you need now costs a fortune. I believe it is most likely cheaper to buy it ready-made. These OSB terrariums are good and affordable, and they are also practical. I think they may have the disadvantage on one hand in terms of appearance. An OSB terrarium is certainly not a visual highlight. Well, by now there are also some that are veneered, where there is a nice veneer on the outside making it look better. The second disadvantage is certainly that the wood suffers over time from the moisture, to put it that way. When I have high humidity in the terrarium, whether it's because the water bowl is emptied or my substrate is damp or I have moist moss in a corner, then I face some disadvantages with the wooden terrarium. This is certainly a drawback of the wooden terrarium. The third type that has proven itself recently or is new on the rise is some kind of PVC plastic terrariums. Really great. I would say it has the same advantages as the glass terrarium, which really retains moisture. There is actually no aging of a plastic terrarium. It still looks the same after 10 or 20 years as it did on the first day. On the other hand, it is not so sensitive during shipping, for example, or when transporting, so nothing can break. So there are certainly advantages to plastic terrariums. However, the downside might be that the price of plastic is higher compared to glass, or even the classic wood that was mentioned earlier? Well, I believe the plastic terrariums are probably the most expensive among the three in this list. Now we come to the topic of terrarium size, and that's where the size discussion begins. Most people buy a young animal, such as a puppy or kitten when they first get it, which will eventually grow considerably larger. What should I do? Do I need to start with a small terrarium and then get a larger one as the animal grows, and possibly an even larger one after that? Or can I just take a large terrarium and the animal will grow into the terrarium, so to speak? My opinion on this is that I usually try to tell people to just buy the final size of the terrarium right away. So the classic snakes, king pythons, corn snakes, Lampropeltis, it is definitely feasible. With lizards, it is a little more difficult, because I feed a lizard with insects, crickets, grasshoppers, and locusts. If I have a small lizard in a huge terrarium and I scatter a few food insects in there, it doesn't take 2 minutes before the food insects are spread all over the huge terrarium, and by the time the little lizard or spiny-tailed lizard reacts, all the food animals have already dispersed. I might be able to help myself with that, so that's the point, where I say, okay, I might actually need 2 terrariums, one for the juvenile and then one for the adult animal. Or I can compromise by placing a small plastic tub in the large final terrarium, using it as a temporary terrarium for now. So then I have the climate from the large terrarium, I have the lamp, maybe not directly 1,000 above, but just slightly above. I have the appropriate light and heating in there. And when I feed in this small plastic container, the feeder insects don't hide as much. I can make that as a compromise if I actually want to buy the final terrarium right away and don't want to buy everything twice, which is quite understandable. Otherwise, regarding the snakes, it is sometimes said that, well, the small snake does not feel comfortable in the large terrarium. I believe that this is a misconception. I think that even a small snake can feel comfortable in a large terrarium if the perfect climate is truly present throughout the entire large terrarium. If I now have a large terrarium with only one heat spot where the climate is suitable, and the rest of the terrarium is ice cold, and my little snake happens to hide in the cold part, then it will not thrive well in the large terrarium because it does not have the right climate in the spot where it is hiding. If I have a perfect climate throughout the terrarium, then I believe the little king pythons or the little corn snakes or whatever is in the large terrarium will feel comfortable, of course making sure that they cannot escape anywhere. A baby corn snake can potentially escape through the sliding doors or through any small vents or ventilation holes or something like that, so definitely be careful about that. But otherwise, in my opinion, you can also use the final terrarium for a young animal. And then the crucial or hotly debated question, how large must the terrarium need to be? When I think back to when I started as a terrarium keeper, the terrarium could never be big enough because you mentally envision it as a mammal's habitat. A terrarium has to be quite large because the animal needs to be able to move around and do its thing, and so on. So humans are mammals, and as mammals we have the need for a lot of space. A reptile is not a mammal. A reptile is an ambush predator. A reptile is an animal that truly hides in the tightest spaces. A reptile is an energy saver. A reptile never crawls or runs around aimlessly, because that makes no sense at all. If I am a cold-blooded animal designed to consume little energy, it makes no sense for me to wander around aimlessly or crawl around and then waste energy. That's why reptiles almost always just lie around lazily, which annoys some people as it seems so boring to just lie around, but that's how it is. Now I've gone off on a tangent. What I mean to say is that the size of the terrarium should not be too small, but it also doesn't make sense to choose a large species and then have to invest a ridiculous amount in energy costs just to heat that oversized terrarium. So maybe slow down a bit at the beginning. In the past, there was at least a rule of thumb for snakes. The length plus the width of the terrarium should be as long as the snake. I have an animal measuring 1.50 millimeter long, and a terrarium of 1 meter by 50 centimeter fits a 1.50 meter snake. Now I've grown a bit bigger. In Germany, this Reptile TV is watched internationally, but I will refer to Germany for now. In Germany, there are care guidelines that have been developed or commissioned by the Federal Agency for Nature Conservation. We will display these care guidelines below, which you can click on. It states the minimum requirements for each reptile species, referred to as minimum requirements, including how large the terrarium should be. And according to these requirements, we should orient ourselves in Germany. But it might also be international, or if you are from abroad. At least if it is not regulated differently or more strictly there, it could be a good reference point for you. I believe these conservation guidelines are overall good, as one can really agree with most of them. There are small faux pas where the king python is referred to as a 1,000 tree dweller who likes to climb and so on. However, I have often discussed this. In Africa, a king python actually climbs in the terrarium. You sometimes see them climbing. I think it has to do with the temperature, but in Africa, a king python is always on the ground. You will never find a king python in a tree. There are a few minor details, but the care guidelines are already good. To give you a few examples, king pythons, for instance. So just to clarify, these guidelines are always based on 2 animals, assuming that one keeps 2 animals in the terrarium, which might not reflect reality, as terrarium animals are often kept alone. A terrarium animal actually prefers to be alone, but the care guidelines are always for 2 animals. To give you a few examples, for snakes like king pythons, boa constrictors, or other large snakes, the dimensions are typically specified as 0.5 x 0.75. This means that the total length of the animal is used as the width, 0.5 of the total length is the depth, and 0.75 is the height. So I have a king python, and now let's keep it simple. The terrarium must be 1 meter wide, 50 centimeters deep, and 75 centimeters high. This applies to animals up to 1.50 meters. If the animals are larger, the number decreases slightly, starting from 50. If I have a 2-meter boa, then the dimension should only be 0.75 x 0.5 x 0.75. So I need 2001 for the 2-meter boa. Not a 2-meter wide terrarium, but only 0.75 of the body length, which means 1.50 meter. The depth remains 0.5. So I need a terrarium that is 1.50 meter by 1 ounce by 150 meters for the boa. For climbing snakes like a corn snake, the guidelines suggest a size of 1x 0.5 x 1 times the body length. So I have a classic size for a corn snake from the corner, which I would say is 1.20 meter, maybe 1.30 meters. Therefore, I need a terrarium that is 0.5 meters wide and 1.30 meters long, which would be 65 centimeters. And once the body length in height, so I'm back to 1 mm, I find this size for the corn snake borderline large, because when the corn snake is in that giant terrarium lying in the corner, I actually think it's a bit excessive. There are also other types where I find it understated. For example, we had an episode about the crown basilisk, and there is an episode where the guidelines listed here are, in my opinion, almost too small. So I would give them more space. It's not that I generally say everything should be smaller. There are also animals for which I would say larger. Lastly, for a few bearded dragons, the measurement of lizards is not taken as the total length, but rather the head to body length. Bearded dragon. What is the head to body length of a bearded dragon? About 20 to 25 centimeters. Let's take a really large bearded dragon at 25 centimeters. 5 times 25 would mean 1.25 meters. 4 times would be 1 meters, and 3 times would be 75 centimeters in height. 1.25 meter by 1 min by 0.75 meter would be the requirement for a 25 centimeter long bearded dragon, which is already a substantial enclosure for a bearded dragon or for 2 leopard geckos, which require a space of 4 by 3 by 2 head to body lengths. That means I am probably somewhere around 50 or 60 centimeters in terrarium length for the leopard gecko. Could I elaborate further or provide some more examples? It probably doesn't make sense. Lastly, perhaps a word about turtles. Most tortoises, such as Testudo, Geohelone, Aldebrachellis, and so on, have a carapace length of 8 times 4 times the carapace length, 8 times the carapace. So I have a turtle that is 10 centimeters long. I need it to be 80 centimeters wide and 40 centimeters deep. The height is not specified for turtles. It makes sense that turtles do not climb. So 8 times 4 is the turtle directive. In conclusion, my perspective is, as I mentioned before, the guidelines are not bad at all. I believe they make sense. I'm curious about your opinion on this, so feel free to post below. Do they generally make sense? Did you find a few bloopers in there, like when he says, well, or how about the king tree dweller or something, where you think, oh, who wrote that? So there are a couple of small mistakes in there. Maybe some of you will have fun finding the errors. I'm looking forward to your feedback. Otherwise, that was the episode about terrariums and terrarium size. At the end, it got relatively theoretical with all these sizes. Your ears will be ringing. You have to fast forward if necessary. No, please don't fast forward. Otherwise, as I said, stay loyal to me, give a thumbs up if you liked it, and check out the terrariums.